between Hunter and Lee. March, but quite how much of that the referee saw, I'm not sure. And it looks to me as if it's broken out again. It's broken out again, and now this time...
I hate him. Those 3 words appeared on millions of lips when Francis Lee's name was mentioned in the 1970s. But the truth isn't that simple. This is the story of a man who survived football's most violent era, where every match felt like a war and every tackle could end a career. Francis Lee had enemies. 5 players in particular seemed to make it their mission to destroy him. But did he truly never forgive them, or did something deeper happen as the years passed? Before we dive into the feuds, you need to understand the world Lee inhabited. The first division in the 1970s wasn't just rough, it was lawless. Every successful team had a hard man. Leeds had Hunter and Bremner. Liverpool had Smith. Arsenal had Story. These weren't just tough players, they were specialists in violence. Their job was to administer physical retribution, to break the spirit of opponents before they could inflict damage on the scoreboard. Lee was 5'8", with a low centre of gravity that made him nearly impossible to dispossess without fouling. He was dynamic and pugnacious. He didn't shy away from contact. He initiated it. He would run directly at defenders, inviting the challenge. In an era where you could legally tackle from behind, Lee's refusal to be intimidated was seen as an existential challenge to the hard man's authority. So they went after him hard. Let's talk about Norman Hunter first, the man they called bites your legs. If Lee had one defining enemy, it was him. November the 1st, 1975, Derby County versus Leeds United. The context was already explosive. Lee had already won a penalty earlier in the match after a challenge by Hunter. The Leeds players were fuming. They believed Lee was a chronic simulator, a diver who conned referees. Hunter felt the injustice of what he saw as a soft penalty. Lee felt the vindication of penalising a player who had kicked him for a decade. As the ball moved away in the second half, Hunter threw a punch, not a push or a shove, a proper right hook, thrown with intent to injure. It split Lee's lips so badly that teammates later said you could poke your tongue through the gash. Most players would have collapsed, would have made sure the referee saw it, not Lee. He stayed on his feet and went after Hunter. Witnesses described it like watching a pit bull savage a Rottweiler. Lee, significantly shorter than Hunter, threw flurries of punches. Both men were sent off by referee Derek Nippard, but the violence didn't stop there. In the tunnel, they went at it again. Lee, consumed by what they called a red mist, had to be physically restrained by teammates and staff, including trainer Gordon Guthrie and teammate Roy McFarland. The hatred in their eyes was visible. This wasn't professional, this was personal. But here's where the real injustice happened. The Football Association reviewed the incident using silent film. They couldn't hear anything. Worse still, reports suggest they didn't even see Hunter's first punch. The camera angle missed it. The cut of the footage obscured the initiation, making it appear as though both men were equally guilty. So Lee got punished heavily for fighting back against an attack he never started. 4 weeks banned and a $250 fine. For a man like Lee, who prided himself on standing up to bullies, being punished for defending himself was a bitter pill. Lee was the victim of the punch, and then the victim of the adjudication. For years, it seemed like Lee would never forgive Hunter. The media loved the story. 2 hard men who hated each other, blood enemies. The eternal feud narrative sold newspapers and filled column inches. It was convenient, dramatic, and fitted perfectly with the dirty Leeds mythology that dominated football discourse. But something changed as they got older. They started appearing together at events. The Lee versus Hunter fight became a staple of the after-dinner speaking circuit. They would reference it to entertain audiences, effectively monetizing their own history of violence. Hunter even admitted in an interview that he'd seen the little fella since, and he was a smashing bloke. They actually got on quite well. When Hunter died in 2020 from complications related to COVID, Lee's reaction wasn't that of a man holding a grudge. He paid heartfelt tribute. Both men realised they were products of their time. The violence was professional, not personal. Once the boots were hung up, The reason for the hatred evaporated. They became unlikely friends, bonded by shared experience and mutual understanding of what it took to survive that era. So while Lee may never have forgiven the act itself, he undoubtedly forgave the man. Then there was Billy Bremner, the captain of Dirty Leeds. Bremner was different from Hunter. Hunter was the executioner. Bremner was the commander, short, fiery, Scottish, and possessed of an indomitable will to win. In many ways, Bremner was the mirror image of Francis Lee. Both were combative, both refused to be bullied, both would do whatever it took to win. The friction between Lee and Bremner was born of competitive spite. Leeds and Manchester City were the two dominant forces in the north, and Bremner was the gatekeeper Lee had to bypass. Bremner was known for his measured tones of violence, studs down the shin, late tackles disguised as clumsiness, the kind of professional cynicism that stayed just on the right side of a red card. The tension was made worse by the narrative of cheating. Brian Clough, during his disastrous 44-day tenure at Leeds, famously told Bremner and the squad to throw their medals in the bin because they'd won them all by cheating. Lee, who faced Leeds regularly, likely subscribed to this view. He saw Bremner's Leeds as a team that manipulated the rules to their advantage. And here's the irony. Lee was accused of the exact same thing: diving, simulation. Both men were painted with the same brush, just in different colours. Lee was vilified for going down too easily. Bremner was celebrated for his passion and leadership, even when that passion left opponents bloodied. What Lee resented most about Bremner was the immunity. As captain of Dirty Leeds and Scotland, Bremner often escaped the censure that Lee faced for his diving. The double standard gnawed at Lee. Bremner's aggression was lauded. Lee's survival instincts were condemned, but the bitterness faded. Lee came to respect Bremner as a worthy opponent who understood what it took to win in that brutal era. They were warriors on opposite sides, each committed to victory at any cost. Tommy Smith was different. He was the one Lee truly feared. Bill Shankly said Smith wasn't born. He was quarried. Smith didn't just tackle. He hurt people. It was deliberate, calculated. He believed in the psychological destruction of the opponent. He wanted forwards to be looking for him instead of the ball. Fear was the weapon, and Smith wielded it like a master craftsman. In August 1968 at Anfield, Smith and Peter Wall challenged Lee. The photographs from that match capture the essence of the era. Lee on the ball, determined and balanced. Smith engaging in a sliding tackle that was more assault than sporting attempt. The images show raw aggression frozen in time. Smith admitted he wasn't dirty, but when he tackled someone, they must have felt it. That was his philosophy. Make them feel it. Make them remember. Make them think twice before running at you again. Plant the seed of doubt in their mind, so next time they hesitate. Lee later said Smith was one of the players who would have modern hard men crying for their mummy. It's not affection. It's traumatized respect. The respect you give to something that genuinely frightened you. Lee feared Smith more than he hated him, but he never forgave the trauma. Unlike Hunter, Smith never softened. There was no warm reconciliation, no dinner circuit friendship. Lee's relationship with Smith remained distant. Mutual recognition of toughness, but nothing more. No shared laughter about old battles. Just cold acknowledgement. Liverpool's boot room philosophy under Shankly was collective. They hunted in packs. Smith was the enforcer and Lee was the isolated target. That feeling of being hunted created a different kind of unforgiveness that never quite disappeared. Jack Charlton presented a different problem. He was massive. A towering centre-back who used his size like a weapon. Teammates described Charlton as bossing players around like a traffic warden. For someone like Lee, who was fiercely independent, Charlton's authoritarian presence was infuriating. Charlton would bark orders, organise everything, dominate his area with an iron fist. Charlton would clamber all over opponents. He would use illegal leverage, his arms, his height, everything to dominate in the air. Lee, at 5'8", was physically incapable of competing with Charlton in those situations, and Charlton exploited that mismatch ruthlessly. The frustration Lee felt wasn't just about being outmuscled. It was about referees ignoring Charlton's fouls. Because of his reputation as a World Cup winner, Charlton seemed to get away with things other defenders wouldn't. The injustice of it burned. The double standard infuriated Lee to his core. But time changed this feud. Research into the heavy leather footballs of the 1970s linked heading to neurodegenerative diseases. Jack Charlton, like his World Cup winning teammates Martin Peters and Ray Wilson, suffered from dementia. While Lee died of cancer, he belonged to the same generation of guinea pigs. When Charlton died, Lee's family and the city community expressed deep respect. Lee's brother Tommy noted that Jack was everybody's hero. The anger faded into nostalgia and shared loss. They were all victims of the same system, the same era. Finally, there was Peter Storey, the assassin of Highbury. Storey occupied a strange space in Lee's gallery of rivals. He was an opponent, a destroyer, ranked alongside Hunter and Smith as one of the dirtiest players in history. But he was also an international teammate. At club level, Storey was the defensive anchor of Bertie Mee's double-winning Arsenal side. His role was simple: stop the opposition's best player by any means necessary. Lee was a creator and scorer. Storey was a negator. The philosophical chasm between them was vast. But here's where it gets complicated. In a Euro qualifier against Greece in April 1971, Storey provided the cross for a Francis Lee goal. Think about that moment. Lee had to trust Storey as a teammate on Wednesday, knowing Storey would try to kick him out of the game on Saturday. For England, Storey's aggression was an asset to Lee. He was the minder who protected Lee from foreign defenders. It's impossible to fully hate a man who's protected you in hostile environments, even if he's your mortal enemy domestically. Lee's feelings towards Storey were conflicted. Professional enemies, national teammates, two sides of the same coin. The line between hatred and camaraderie blurred every time they pulled on the Three Lions shirt together. Now let's talk about why Lee was targeted so viciously. The nickname, Lee One Pen. In the 1971-72 season, Lee scored 15 penalties, 13 in the league, 1 in the FA Cup, 1 in the League Cup. It set an English record that stood for decades. The nickname, Lee One Pen, morphed into Lee One Pen. The implication was clear. He was winning penalties he didn't deserve. Referee Keith Hackett noted that Lee had a reputation for falling, which meant officials viewed him with scepticism from the opening whistle. This created a dangerous feedback loop. Because referees believed Lee dived, they were less likely to punish genuine fouls against him. This gave defenders like Hunter and Smith a license to increase the severity of their tackles. They knew they could get away with more, but modern analysis tells a different story. Pitches in the 1970s were often mud baths by November. Lee argued that when running at full tilt on mud, even a slight nudge from a defender was enough to destabilise him. He wasn't diving. He was losing his footing due to illegal contact that the referee couldn't appreciate. Without the fall, without the theatrics, fouls simply weren't called. It wasn't cheating, it was survival. The only way to protect yourself in a lawless league was to make the violence visible, to force referees to see what they were ignoring. There was also a class element. Lee was a successful businessman while still playing. He ran a waste paper recycling business. He drove a Rolls-Royce. He was flash. The hard men like Smith and Hunter were working-class archetypes who likely resented Lee's wealth. The violence was partly a class-levelling mechanism, bringing the flash striker back down to earth, one brutal tackle at a time. Lee's unforgiveness was rooted in this injustice. He was punished for surviving, vilified for refusing to be broken. So what's the verdict? Did Francis Lee die holding grudges? No, he didn't. Norman Hunter was reconciled. The bloodiest feud of his life ended in friendship and mutual respect. They made peace with the past and found common ground. Jack Charlton was mourned. The traffic warden became a symbol of a lost, glorious era. Lee understood they were both casualties of the same brutal system. Billy Bremner and Tommy Smith were respected. The animosity dissolved into recognition of their shared role in making the First Division the toughest league in the world. Peter Storey was accepted. The duality of rival and teammate blurred the lines of hatred. They were enemies and brothers, depending on the shirt. History has given Lee the sympathy he was denied during his playing days. We no longer see a cheat. We see a brave, dynamic striker operating in a lawless environment, targeted by defenders who were legally permitted to assault him. The dives are now understood as survival instincts in an era where referees offered no protection. Francis Lee didn't die bitter. He died as the last of a specific breed, a man who could take a punch to the face, stitch it up, buy the company that made the bandages, and then have a drink with the man who threw the punch. A warrior who understood that the battles were temporary, but the war was eternal. The unforgiven weren't the players. They were the circumstances, the silent films that missed the truth, the mud-clogged pitches where every step was a gamble, the heavy leather balls that scrambled brains and stole memories, that brutal, beautiful game that gave them everything and demanded payment in blood and broken bones. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe for more stories from football's wildest days.